What's up, everyone, and welcome back to this, the 99th edition of the Superstream. My name is Derek, author and webmaster of Gematrinator.com, and in today's video, we'll be focusing on the big news story from over the weekend. The death of filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle, with the subsequent arrest of his son Nick Reiner. Now, in this video, we'll of course talk about some of the fascinating numerology in this story, but also the synchronicity of how this news connects to other topics that I've been discussing here on this channel. Now, in one of my more recent videos, I talked about the return of Philip Rivers to the National Football League. This was Superstream 98. And in this video, I explained how it was all connected to John Cena's last match, as well as the new American Pope, Pope Leo. This riddle extended into the firing of Michigan head coach Sharon Moore. And then on the same day that John Cena had his last match, we had a shooting at Brown University, which was a fabulous riddle for the moon. Well, what I haven't talked about yet is how the game that Philip Rivers played turned out. So after nearly 5 years out of the league, Rivers returned with the Colts and lost a heartbreaking game in the last seconds to the Seattle Seahawks. Notice how this final score was 16-18. Now, this was pretty interesting because in my video on Philip Rivers, we talked about the number 1618. Now, 1.618 gives us the first 4 digits of the golden ratio. And the golden ratio is something that Philip Rivers is very connected to. Consider how his name starts with Phi, which is the name for the golden ratio. His initials, PR, the 16th and 18th letters. And in the language of Gematria, where letters, words, and names are turned into numbers, the name Philip Rivers equals both 161 in ordinal and 80 in reduction, which reflects the first 5 digits of the golden ratio. When Rivers first retired from the NFL, it was 16 years, 18 days after his first game. These digits are also found in the number of days between his birthday and Prince Philip of the royal family. Now, another thing that connects Philip to the golden ratio is his birth numerology. 12 plus 8 plus 19 plus 81. This gives us a sum of 120, which is the alphabetic ordinal value of golden ratio. In fact, Philip retired on the date 20/1, the 20th of January, after his first game was on 1/2, January 2nd. Well, in this game that finished 16-18 this weekend, Rivers threw for 120 yards. So this is just another perfect example how, if you pay attention to the patterns of numerology, you can actually pick up on tells of the future, in this case, the final score of the game. But here's what makes this so strange to me, is that when I saw the story of Rob Reiner being murdered by a family member in Los Angeles, a big Hollywood guy, well, one of the first stories I thought of was Gene Hackman, right? Because he and his wife died in their home earlier this year. I'll talk about Gene in a second, but actually, one of the first things that came to mind was the death of another Philip. In fact, a Philip with just one L, like Philip Rivers. Back in 1998, comedian Phil Hartman was gunned down in his own bed by his third wife. And when I thought about this in regards to now another big Hollywood name getting killed by a family member, I figured there had to be a connection. As we've been talking about Philip, the guy who plays for the Colts, who used to play for the Chargers, 2 of the 3 NFL's horse teams, And the name Philip literally means lover of horses. Now, I want to quickly look at Gene Hackman because there's some numbers that connect good old Gene to Rob Reiner. Now, it's estimated that Hackman died on February 18th. And if you measure from that date to the date of Rob Reiner's death, you get two numbers here, right? 299 days or a span of 300 days. When you plug in Rob Reiner's birthday, March 6th of 1947, we find that he was born during lunation 299. Remember, this is the Brown lunation number. We just had the big shooting at Brown University in connection to the moon. But this is also the date leaving 300 days in the year, right? So he has a 299 and 300 in his numerology. Using capital letters, his full name, Robert Norman Reiner, also equals 300. And not only did he die 300 days after Gene Hackman, but it was also exactly 300 lunar phases after the 9/11 attacks. Now, a lunar phase simply measures the time between new moon to new moon, also called a synodic month, a little over 29 and a half days. And remember, John Cena's last match was just the day before on Saturday, also 300 lunar phases after 9/11. And in reverse gematria, John Cena's last match equals 300. Also 1190 and 1116. So you get all the digits of the 9/11 attacks and flipped upside down. So that we covered in previous videos, but now we get the death of Rob Reiner that is similar to the murder of Phil Hartman, both killed by family members. And look at the number of days between the births of Rob Reiner and Phil Hartman. These two Hollywood stars were born 1 year, 6 months, 18 days apart from each other. So what are the odds that Reiner dies in similar fashion to Phil on the same day Philip Rivers loses 16-18? Which, again, was the big number we talked about with Philip Rivers before the game happened. All of this is verifiable on my YouTube channel. Now, we'll be talking a lot about the moon once again today, as its numerology is paramount to the English language and the geometry of the solar system. The moon is heavily connected to the golden ratio, as if you make a triangle from the center of the Earth to the center of the moon when stacked on top of each other. Notice the long side of this triangle gives us the golden ratio. Moon, golden, and golden ratio all equal 57 in Gematria. So does the name Phil Hartman. In fact, Phil Hartman is a perfect supermatch in Gematria with the phrase golden ratio. Notice the 120, which is shared by Philip Rivers, who threw for 120 yards to match his 120 birth numerology. Another strange detail of this story is that it's said the double murder occurred after an argument that unfolded at a Christmas party hosted by comedian and TV host Conan O'Brien. Now, I certainly didn't have Conan O'Brien on my list of names in association with a double murder that I would be decoding. Not on my bingo card. But here we are. We're talking about Conan O'Brien. And, you know, his full name also has this 120 in reverse reduction. So let's think about this from a wider view. So Philip Rivers makes his comeback and plays against the Seattle Seahawks in the state of Washington. Well, John Cena's last match against Gunther on Saturday night was in the city of Washington, D.C. Well, Rob Reiner died on December 14th, which is the same date in history that the first U.S. President, George Washington, passed away. December 14th. Notice how Rob Reiner was born a span of exactly 11,220 weeks after George Washington. In Sumerian Gematria, which takes the alphabetic order and multiplies it by 6, the name George Washington, the city Washington, D.C., both equal 1122 in Gematria. The name Conan O'Brien also shares this 1122. So does Turning Point USA. Now, why am I talking about Turning Point USA? Well, as the police are saying, Rob was killed by his son, Nick Reiner. Back in 2015 and 2016, we had the release of a film called Being Charlie, which was written by Nick Reiner as a bit of a biopic. And this was directed by his father, Rob. So what are the odds that we get this connection to a movie named Charlie? Now, Rob Reiner made a lot of films, starred in even more, but only one with his son, Nick. So with all the Charlie riddles we've been seeing play out, you know, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, certainly the biggest news story of the year. What are the odds that this is the name of the movie? Now, the main character of this movie is played by a guy named Robinson. That's pretty crazy because Charlie Kirk was reportedly killed by a guy named Tyler Robinson, right? Who just happened to make his first court appearances over the past week. Charlie Kirk, the founder of conservative organization Turning Point USA. And indeed, Charlie Kirk and his widow, Erica, connected to this entire riddle by the numbers. So we'll talk more about that in the second part of this video, but what I want to focus on first is the number 17, which of course is the number on the jersey of NFL quarterback Philip Rivers. Rivers returned to the NFL after the injury of another 17, Daniel Jones. We talked about this because the number 17 equals 1700 in reverse standard gematria, and in both standard and Latin, which are the two main extended methods I look at. These ciphers yield much larger numbers than the base methods. The phrase Philip Rivers unretiring equals 1700 in both. And then on the same day he returns, Rob Reiner is killed on the date leaving 17 days in the year, which also had numerology of 17. Kill, sacrifice, and ritual human sacrifice all link to the number 17. And this is all connected to Phil Hartman. Using square numbers, the name Phil Hartman equals 1700. And not only did Hartman die exactly 17 weeks before his own birthday, but Nick Reiner was 1717 days of age. Now, the number 1717 points us to the organization of Freemasonry. Modern Freemasonry lodges, trace their roots back to the premier Grand Lodge of England, which was founded in the year 1717. I also want to give a quick shout out to Cody and his channel, Decoding with Cody. We do a lot of videos together now, but we also help each other with research behind the scenes as well. He's been talking about the Charlie Kirk and Philip Rivers code Probably even more than I have. In fact, definitely a lot more than I have. So some credit to him with these finds, especially since the number 17 is apparently considered evil. And I didn't look too deeply into this myself, but in ancient mysticism, you have this theory that the number 17 was evil, as it stood between two very pretty numbers of 16 and 18. And I'm sure there's something to this, considering that number 17 comes back in a game that ends 16 to 18. So read up on that yourself. There's always more knowledge to be found than what I have to share on this channel. When this film Being Charlie first came out, it was 17 years after the death of Phil Hartman. And don't forget Charlie Kirk killed on a date with 17 numerology. Also, when Yale University had its special Skull and Bones anniversary in October of 2023, that was also on a date with numerology of 17. And Skull and Bones will be a topic of this video. President George Washington dying on the same date as Rob Reiner is a big piece of this riddle, as I touched on earlier. Back in the year 2022, in the state of Georgia, we had the destruction of a famous occult monument, the Georgia Guidestones. These Guidestones opened on the date March 22nd, or 322. We'll talk about that in a bit. But notice the destruction date of July 6th. July 6th is also the birthday of another president named George W. Bush, who turned 76 on the same day the Guidestones came down. So Rob Reiner dies 10,062 days after Phil Hartman. And in Sumerian, Phil Hartman shares 1,062 Gematria with golden ratio and turning point. But there's more. Rob Reiner's death was also exactly 1,062 sidereal months, or lunar orbits, after George W. Bush was born. And in that same Sumerian method, the name George Walker Bush equals 1,062. Dead 10,062 days after Phil Hartman was also killed by his family member. In ordinal, the number 76 equals 162. And again, this brings us back to George W. Bush's birthday. George W. Bush was a graduate of Yale University and a member of its infamous Skull and Bones secret society. Skull and Bones, secret society, human sacrifice, and blood sacrifice all equals 76. And this is why I think Conan O'Brien is an important element to the numerology of this story and why he's being mentioned. Notice how Conan O'Brien was born exactly 760 weeks after Phil Hartman and was 1,832 weeks old exactly when Hartman died. 1832 is the year that Skull and Bones was founded at Yale University. Now check this out. Philip Rivers threw one touchdown pass in his return to the NFL. And it was to this guy, Josh Downs. And you have to like this, right? Look at his birthday. August 12th. Really? Well, that date is written 8/12, whereas Philip Rivers was born on 12/8. Josh Downs also born in 2001, the year of the 9/11 attacks. But look at his name in Gematria. Josh Downs equals 1832, that special skull and bones number. In the alphabetic order, Josh Downs equals 127. And look how old Josh Downs was for the game. Exactly 1,270 weeks old. Now, I talked about this in my very first post after Charlie Kirk was shot in Utah, which, by the way, is where this movie Being Charlie takes place. In rural Utah, the same state that Kirk was killed in. Anyway, hopefully I can find this post quickly. The number 127 was very significant to the death of Charlie Kirk. Just bear with me a second while I hunt this down. This was actually the first number I talked about because remember we had the church shooting a month before? The name Kirk means church. And that was in Minneapolis, which equals 127. And then Kirk was also shot during Brown Lunation 1270 at Utah Valley University, which equals 127, like the word assassinate. Yale shares 426 gematria with the word Catholic. And check this out. Phil Hartman was 16,426 days old when Nick Reiner was born, 426. He was also 14 years, 206 days old when Conan O'Brien was born, another 426. In fact, the name Philip Hartman equals 145 and 206, also 426 in Latin. So Philip Hartman with the same 426 as Yale. The word Catholic, another 145. So how does this all connect to the Georgia Guidestones? Well, we start in the alphabetic order, where the name Philip Edward Hartman equals 200, just like Georgia Guidestones is 200. Nick Reiner was born 200 days before or after another bombing, the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. Nick Reiner was born 200 days later. The Guidestones shares 223 gematria with skull and crossbones, which explains its opening date, March 22nd, 322. The Guidestones were destroyed 322 sidereal months after Phil Hartman died, which happened 32 weeks and 2 days after Charlie Kirk's birthday. Not only was Charlie Kirk born a span of 223 days after Rob Reiner's birthday, but on the day that Reiner and his wife were killed, Charlie Kirk was exactly 32 years and 2 months old. Unless he's dead, I suppose, in which case he would be exactly 32 years, 2 months old. An important number to Skull and Bones is 885. First, consider how the Washington Monument was completed and dedicated in the year 1885, which is a number connected to ancient Egyptian mythology. Remember, Egypt has the same 572 gematria as Skull and Bones, both 572. In fact, the Indianapolis Colts are currently still sitting at 572 wins in franchise history. In fact, they've been at this total for the last month. They've lost 4 in a row, had a bye week before that. And their last win was on November 9th, or 9/11, in Berlin, Germany, on the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So just like the Twin Towers collapsed, the Berlin Wall collapsed, well, now the Colts have completely collapsed. So anyway, when you look at this movie Being Charlie, it was released on May 6th of 2016. That was exactly 1,885 weeks after the Georgia Guidestones opened. Skull and Crossbones, as well as Skull and Crossbones 322, both equal 885. The Georgia Guidestones were destroyed 885 months after Phil Hartman was born, and 8,805 days after he died. But think about this combination, 885. This is like 2 8s and a 5. Phil Hartman died on the date 28/5, the 28th of May. He was 285 days after his birthday when the Guidestones were destroyed. Hartman was born 285 days after Rob Reiner's date of death. 285, also the standard value of Charlie Kirk. However, this date, May 28th, can also be written as 5/28. And the Guidestones first opened 5 months, 28 days after his birthday. And when Phil Hartman died on 5/28, it was just 4 days after Pope Leo turned 528 lunar phases old. The film Being Charlie first premiered at the Toronto Film Festival on the same date that Pope Leo was born, September 14th. September 14th, also the date that Nick Reiner was born. And look at this. Being Charlie hit theaters exactly 3,528 weeks after Phil Hartman was born. The name Charlie Kirk also equals 235, and Charlie Kirk was born 2,350 weeks after Phil Hartman was born. In fact, when you measure between the premiere date and the release date of the movie Breaking Charlie, you get 235 days. So there's some more connections that I may come back to in a little bit. But I want to talk more about this movie, because the synchronicity is painfully obvious. And don't forget, guys, this is coming off of the heels of a synchronicity with another movie, a 1998 film called Snake Eyes, where a character named Charles Kirkland is assassinated by getting shot in the throat in the opening minutes of the movie. And it happens in September. And the boxer in the ring during the assassination who takes a dive is named Robinson. Or is it, no, it's just named Tyler, right? The executioner, Tyler. Like Tyler Robinson. And a kid named Robinson playing the main character in this movie. Nick Robinson, born on 3/22. Now, what this is technically called, by murdering both of his parents, if that's what Nick Reiner did, then he would have committed parricide. The murder of your parents. This is called parricide. Isn't it interesting that the name Nick Reiner has matching 281 Gematria with parricide? In fact, that's also the 60th prime number. 281. The name Charlie Kirk equals 60. The name Phil Hartman also equals 60. Now, in the alphabetic order, the word parasite equals 83. When Being Charlie came out, Rob Reiner, the director, was exactly 830 months old. When Reiner was the victim of parasite, he was a span of 83 days before his next birthday. The word murder equals 83, like Turning Point USA. Also, notice how Georgia Guidestones equals 830. One of the rocks of this riddle, so to speak. But check this out. Look how old Charlie James Kirk was when Being Charlie hit theaters. He was exactly 279 lunar phases old. And in reverse, Charlie James Kirk equals 279, like Reiner in Satanic. Satanic Gematria. The big 666 cipher, as displayed by the chart on your screen. This movie came out on, or it premiered on Nick Reiner's 22nd birthday, matching Kirk. Hit theaters 235 days later. Charlie Kirk, which equals 235, was 235 days after his birthday when he founded Turning Point. Being Charlie hit theaters on the 127th day of the year, which was a number I just talked about earlier. This is the 31st prime number. Nick Reiner was born a span of 31 days before Charlie Kirk. Exactly 1 month. And then Kirk died at age 31. But what about this alignment? The number 323. Check this out. In the alphabetic order, Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA, equals 323. In my last video, I mentioned how St. Lucy's Day was just this past weekend. And in Latin Gematria, Lucifer equals 323. The name Charles James Kirk also equals 323 with capital letters. When he committed the double murder, Nick Reiner was exactly 32 years and 3 months old. Charlie Kirk was shot dead 323 years after the founding of Yale. Conan O'Brien was born 323 days before Rob Reiner's birthday. And Rob Reiner was 3 months and 23 days after his birthday when his father, Carl Reiner, died. Down in the description below, you'll find a link to my post on Carl Reiner, the father of Rob, from back in 2020. Now, in this post, it's not a very long post, but it focuses a lot on astrology, particularly the constellation of Sagittarius, as later that year there was a great conjunction on the opposite side of Sagittarius from the sun, essentially framing it in the sky. And I think it's interesting that I made this post, almost 5.5 years ago, whereas now the Reiner family is killed under the sign of Sagittarius. On top of that, it was 1,313 days after the first image of the Sagittarius black hole was released. So back in 2022, we got the first images of the black hole in the Sagittarius constellation. Rob Reiner died a span of 1,313 days after that Sagittarius photo came out. And I point this out because Carl Reiner died at the age of 1,313 sidereal months, which I pointed out in this dated graphic from back in 2020. So it's just strange that I happened to pick up on this Sagittarius theme. You know, he didn't die under Sagittarius. He wasn't born under Sagittarius. But I said it was synced. And now the Reiners are killed under Sagittarius. Go figure. So these posts are linked down below in the description as well. Rob Reiner's death was also exactly 3 years and 23 weeks after the destruction of the Georgia Guidestones. If you happen to have an eye on the live chat, my buddy Adam's giving away a free Gematrinator hoodie. So it might already be given away, but if you're not looking at the live chat, just a heads up. First one to use that promo code on the shop at gematrinator.com will get a free hoodie. All right, we talked a lot about the number 17. Charles James Kirk also shares 107 Gematria with Los Angeles, California. Charlie James Kirk, notice how this name also sums to the 17th triangular number, 153, which was Rob Reiner's lunar age when he was killed, 1,053 lunar orbits. The name Charlie James Kirk also equals 72. Now, the 72nd prime number is 359. And if you measure from the release date of Being Charlie to the Reiner murders, you get 3,509 days. But with the end date, that's also 3,510 days, which are the same 3 digits in Charlie James Kirk in ordinal. 351, 153, and the 72nd prime number. When the movie premiered in Toronto, Pope Leo was 720 months old exactly. 720, like the Sumerian gematria of golden ratio. Toronto equals 720 and 72. Premiered at the Toronto Festival. Charlie James Kirk also equals 108, and Conan O'Brien was born on the 108th day of the year, whereas Nick Reiner was born on the date leaving 108 days in the calendar. Conan and Nick Reiner were also born 11,108 days apart, or 11,107 without the end date. Now, these are numbers I talk about commonly. First of all, parasite equals 1117. 1118 and 1117 are the 322nd days of the year. 1117 is a special number in numerology, as 1117 is the 187th prime number, and 11 times 17 is 187. Brotherhood of Death, the nickname for Skull and Bones, shares 187 gematria with Society of Jesus and Total Eclipse. The next part of this video will cover the Eclipse code with all of this. Conan O'Brien has matching 187 gematria with Turning Point USA, all lining up with George Washington, Washington, D.C., and the organization he was a member of, the Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Rob Reiner died a span of 223 days after the release date of Being Charlie, whose lead actor has that 22-3 birthday. Skull and Bones equals 149 in the alphabetic order, and that's like the birthday of Nick Reiner, the 14th of September, or 14-9. That date of birth is 149 days after Conan O'Brien's, who is clearly a part of this story because of his link to the Skull and Bones code. That's the same birthday as our Skull and Bones Pope, Pope Leo. Notice how Conan and Pope have gematria of 47. Being Charlie was released on a date with numerology of 47. Rob Reiner was born in the year 47. Nick Reiner was born exactly 470 lunar phases after Pope Leo. This is also exactly 38 years, which is the standard value of Conan O'Brien, 380. And the name Charlie is 38. Nick, the writer of Being Charlie. 38, a number associated with death, killing, and murder. Murder by numbers, sneaking the 38 in there as well. The word for moon in Hebrew, another 38. And that's perfect because Rob Reiner died a span of 283 days after his birthday, which is the Latin value of the moon, 283. The movie Being Charlie is 283. The same digits in Rob's age when Charlie founded Turning Point, USA. To top this off, 283 is the 61st prime number, a skull and crossbones number. The movie came out 61 days after Rob's birthday, and now he's died 61 days after Charlie's birthday. Charles Kirk shares 61 gematria with the accused Nick Reiner. Parasite and Conan O'Brien both also share the 61. So you guys see how Conan O'Brien and why he was probably selected for this story. Whether this is some sort of bizarre skull and bones hoax ritual, or if indeed the Reiners are really dead, which is very possible. Remember, this is the Matrix code we're talking about. This isn't just Freemasonic numerology being exercised through the mainstream. Of course, I have my suspicions, but I'm just a wacky guy in his chair at his computer. So this is all to help you use your own insight and get closer to the truth, not just about the news, but reality itself. As everyone I know who's taken an honest eye and turned this code on themselves have discovered that they too are aligned geometrically with this matrix through the language we speak in just fascinating ways. Erica Kirk, the new Turning Point CEO, had the 444 in her age for both Charlie and Rob's deaths, which is a number connected to skull and crossbones and killing, just like that 885 we looked at earlier, right? So last but certainly never least, we're going to talk about how this is all synced up with the Eclipse code and the two skull and bones eclipses over the United States, particularly the second one in April of 2024. But we'll actually be looking at several eclipses, and I assure you this will make sense, so if you have patience, do stick with me. Now, first, we note that the name Nick Reiner has this gematria of 703, and he reportedly killed his father and mother exactly 70 years and 3 months after the birth of the Pope. It was also exactly 73 sidereal months after his father Carl Reiner died. That happened when Rob was 73 years old. This is a number of sacrifice and ritual sacrifice, both 73. Solar eclipse is a 73. And eclipses, deaths, sacrifices, rebirths, all of these occur together. Rob and Nick Reiner were born 16,994 days apart, which stood out to me because Rob died 1,994 days after his father. 994 is the value of total solar eclipse, which equals 994. But notice the satanic value of 797. I mention this because George Washington was the U.S. president until the year 1797. Rob Reiner was killed 797 days after Yale's special Skull and Bones anniversary when they turned 322 in 2023. 797 is the 139th prime number. Rob Reiner shares 139 Gematria with the name Kirk. And last year's eclipse over the United States belonged to Saros series 139, which is, of course, also a number of Freemasonry. I'm sure everyone I'm talking about in this video is a Freemason. Now, if you measure from this eclipse to the death of Rob Reiner, you get a span of exactly 88 weeks. Turning Point USA and Conan both equal 88. Rob dead on the anniversary of George Washington's death. George Washington, Washington Monument, first president, all 88. The Reiners were killed in California, which equals 88 and 219. You'll notice the movie Being Charlie equals 219, just like Reiner. Being Charlie and Reiner also share Gematria with Erica, Kirk, and Turning Point, especially the number 69. The Reiners were killed 6 months, 9 days after Turning Point's anniversary, and that's a major eclipse number. So all of these phrases equals 69. So Rob Reiner died on December 14th, exactly 5 years after a total solar eclipse. Back in the year 2020, the same year his dad died, a total eclipse swept over South America on December 14th. December 14th, 2020 is the same day the FDA announced its coronavirus vaccine approval. The corona is the nickname of the sun's atmosphere, which is only visible during a total eclipse. So it's no mistake that the FDA waited till the date of an eclipse to do this, because nothing about that had to do with your health. Absolutely nothing. They would rather see you deteriorate slowly in a ventilator than live your fullest life. But I digress. Rob Reiner dies exactly 5 years or 60 months after that eclipse. And this 5665 riddle is very important. Society of Jesus and total eclipse both equal 56. COVID vaccine and coronavirus both equal 56. Rob Reiner was born on a date with 56 numerology, which was also the 65th day of the year. Nick Reiner committing parricide in California, 65, 56, 65. Turning Point USA was founded on the date 6-5 or 5-6. Being Charlie was released theatrically on the date 5-6 or 6-5. When Turning Point was founded, Rob Reiner was 65 years old, while Pope Leo was 56 years old. Charlie Kirk died 6 months, 5 days after Rob Reiner's birthday. The name Charlie equals 56. And look, the name Conan O'Brien equals 56. There he is again. Conan O'Brien. Man, another reason I think Conan O'Brien is synced to this is because of his April 18th birthday, which is written 4/18. The Reiners were murdered 41 months, 8 days after the destruction of the Georgia Guidestones. You also got to appreciate the 161 days, because those are the first 3 digits of the golden ratio. And the day before the killings, let's see, it was, the day before the killings was 10,061 days after Phil Hartman died. So if you're just watching the end of this video, definitely rewind and watch the start, because this is all a riddle for Phil Hartman, who was also killed in Los Angeles by a family member. Coming up in the year 2027, we get a very significant solar eclipse which passes over Egypt. Like I pointed out earlier, Egypt has this 572, like skull and bones. Egyptian mythology, or ancient Egyptian mythology, sums to 1885, like skull and crossbones. So we get this coming eclipse in the year 2027 on August 2nd, or 8/2. 82, clearly a number important to Charlie Kirk. But notice how, excluding the end date, Reiner died 82 days before his next birthday in Los Angeles, which equals 8/20. Reiner's death was 1 year, 231 days before this eclipse. He was killed in the Brentwood neighborhood of LA. Notice how Brentwood equals 1,231. But this connection is important for another reason, because 1231 is the 202nd prime number. Total solar eclipse, skull and bones, ritual human sacrifice, and Nicholas Reiner all equal 202. This eclipse even belongs to Saros series 136, which is Charlie Kirk's birth numerology. Saros 136 is, I believe, the most significant cycle of all Saros series, as it began in the year 1360, when it was 13/6 in the Western Hemisphere. His death was also 1 year, 33 weeks, and 1 day before that eclipse, or 19 months and 19 days. And this stood out because 1331 is the ultimate eclipse number, something I made a post about over 3 years ago and still talk about very frequently to this day. Finally, I want to look at how this is also connected to lunar eclipses. The first thing I noticed is that Rob Reiner was exactly 445 weeks old when Pope Leo was born. Pope Leo sharing the same birthday as his son Nick. Well, this is the Latin gematria of total lunar eclipse, 445. Nick Reiner was born on a date with 135 numerology. And his name, Nicholas, equals 135. Just like Reiner family, right? He's part of the Reiner family, which equals 135 and 1035. Well, this is a number connected to lunar eclipses because lunar eclipse equals 135 and total lunar eclipse is 1035. Nick Reiner was born in 1993, which was the same year as a total lunar eclipse from Lunar Saros series 135. Notice how Nick was born 10 weeks and 6 days before that lunar eclipse. The name Nick Reiner equals 106. So Nick has this amazing alignment to a lunar eclipse. A lunar eclipse is also called a blood moon, which equals 105. And Charlie Kirk died just 3 days after a blood moon. His name equals 105, like Robert Norman Reiner. Now, the ultimate number of the moon is, of course, 666, the number of the beast, and a number integral to the mathematics of the circle. On March 14th, or Pi Day this year, we had a total lunar eclipse that was called the Pi Day eclipse, which equals 666. Reiner died 275 days after the Pi Day eclipse, and 275 is the ordinal value of 666. If you add the digits 6 plus 6 plus 6, you get the same sum as 9 plus 9. And Reiner died a span of 9 months, 9 days after his birthday, and 99 days after the last total lunar eclipse. This is a number important to the moon, which equals 99, as does new moon. The Hebrew value for moon matches the English sum of death, 218. Turning point USA is 218. And Rob Reiner died 2 months, 18 days before the next total lunar eclipse. That lunar eclipse, by the way, falls on March 3rd, or 3-3. And it belongs to Saros series 133. Lunar equals 33, as does the word eclipse. 33. Also, the number 17 equals 990 in Latin, to go along with Reiner dying 9 months, 9 days after his birthday. So, and of course, I'm covering this in Superstream 99. The last double-digit Superstream, so enjoy it while it lasts. Gonna have a huge blowout for Superstream 100, guys. I'm going all out, man. I'm flying to Mexico. I'm gonna go to... Just kidding, I'm not doing anything. I'm just gonna do a normal Superstream. I'm not really one for ceremony. You know, I'm probably doing enough unintentional ritual just by putting these numbers together and showing them to you, so... a couple more things to touch on as I veer away from my post and look at my notes. The Georgia Guidestones. Yes, this is a good one. They stood 19 feet and 3 inches tall. 19 feet, 3 inches. See this? Well, Skull and Bones earlier this month turned 193 years old. Important number to the Pope, whose name Robert Prevost shares 193 Gematria with Roman Catholic Church, which he now leads. Speaking of Pope Leo, he was born exactly 457 months before Charlie Kirk. This is the 88th prime number, which I touched on earlier because Reiner died 88 weeks after the eclipse. Phil Hartman, meanwhile, whose birthday I just forgot off the top of my head for some reason. Phil Hartman, when were you born, buddy? 9/24. That's right. He's got the Jesse Pinkman birthday. Dude, it's so funny. I watched the show Breaking Bad from start to finish just before it ended back in like 2013, 2014. And then I finally rewatched the series back. I never watch TV or movies, guys. I'm just not one of those dudes. It's not in my brain. Whatever it is about my brain chemistry, I can't watch TV and movies. However, that show was awesome. And just to kind of prove what I'm talking about, I actually did a blog post a couple days ago, or I'm sorry, a couple weeks ago, on Breaking Bad. And some of the cool riddles with Werner Heisenberg, Walter White, all this other good stuff. I guess I'll just search for it. Well, I finished watching Breaking Bad on Sunday night. The second time I watched it through. And if you're questioning whether you should watch it again after a decade or whatever, definitely do it, man. The show was better the second time around. But I finished watching the show on Sunday night. And then we get this whole being Charlie. I just made a total idiot of myself. I thought this was called Breaking Charlie. So this is just further proof that we are 1 hour into a super stream, and my brain gets a little mushy. Things get a little fuzzy. So that had nothing to do with anything. What does have to do with this, where was I going? Okay. ADD brain, guys, sorry. Phil Hartman. When was he born? 49? Yeah. Oh, bloody hell. 48. All right. So this whole time, this is what I was trying to get to. Phil Hartman was born 40 years and 57 days before Erica Kirk, like how Charlie Kirk was born 457 months after the Pope. And it's worth mentioning that Conan O'Brien, Phil Hartman, both raised as Catholics. So this does make sense. Again, 457, the 88th prime number. And 88 is the year that the new Turning Point CEO, Erica Kirk, was born. And, man, I'm like particularly repulsed by this woman. I don't know what it is. Ugh. So, yeah, I think that's just about it. Yeah, no more notes really worth going over. There was some more 323 I picked up on. The word Catholicism equals 323. And Phil Hartman has a couple of the 323 connections in addition to what I pointed out with Charlie Kirk in this amazing post, if I might say so myself. Easy for me, the author, to do so, but shit. I mean, it's pretty crazy. This world of numerology, synchronicity, symbolism. I knew when I found this topic about 9 or 10 years ago that there was something special about it. We're actually a little over 9 years since my very first Gematria video now. Can you believe that? December of 2016 is when I started this crap. And I don't see myself quitting. In fact, I'm spending more time on the blog this past few weeks than I think I've ever spent before, and just more energy than ever. And after you guys see what we unveil on the website in the coming weeks, hopefully that energy translates down to you and the next generation of decoders as we seek to learn more about this matrix we are in and some of the lessons that it can provide us. So thanks once again to everybody for tuning in. Whether you're watching live or archived, Do feel free to like, share, subscribe, and do all that other good YouTube stuff. Shout out to Adam for the free hoodie giveaway in the chat. If you'd like your own hoodie but missed out on the giveaway, still have plenty on offer at the shop on gematrinator.com. Or become a member of the website. Both help support keeping everything online, keeping these videos coming forward, and also gives you more powerful decoding tools. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Sorry I'm not good at reading live chat while I'm going through these decodes. I'm kind of a point A to point B guy. That's why I've always driven junkers. Just want to get this information out there. And let you guys kind of make the final judgments about what's happening. Again, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just here to help you think more clearly, or give you more power to think with. Should have thought that phrase out before I said it. Anyway, with that, I'm signing off. Thanks again for watching. More links down in the description below for related content. Do check that out. Also, subscribe to my Rumble channel. In case this YouTube channel goes away for whatever reason, as everything I've been doing over the past few years has been backed up there. Peace, love, God bless, and we will talk to you all next time. See ya.